and coach our moot court team that does reasonably well. We've won 9 of the last 12 national championships. I am here today in my capacity as the national co-founder of the Convention of the States Project. And in light of the conversation that you've just been treated to, I think I'll start off with a brief understanding of sovereignty and rulemaking. The ultimate political rule is this: whoever makes the law, whoever has the power to make the law, is the most powerful group in any country. And it's supposed to be in Article 1, Section 1, there's all law at the federal level is supposed to be made by the Congress of the United States. And instead, we're treated to laws made by the president, laws made by the bureaucracy, laws made by the Supreme Court. On the marriage case, for example, all of you have heard these words from someone. The Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. Well, what they were really supposed to have been doing is that in 1868, when the framers of the 14th Amendment wrote and ratified the 14th Amendment, they legalized same-sex marriage, and it was just hidden in a little crevice someplace for 150 years, and all of a sudden we found it. When you say it correctly, we realize what nonsense it is. The Supreme Court, in fact, did legalize same-sex marriage unlawfully, because the Supreme Court's not supposed to legalize anything. A friend of mine, just in testifying on the Article 5 effort that I helped to lead in Virginia, brought out 2 documents. One was the little pocket constitution that you've all probably got a copy of, or at least you've all seen it. And then he brought out a book. He went and spent $290 on a book that is published by the government printing office, and the title of the book is The Constitution of the United States. It is bigger than a Black's Law Dictionary. It's this huge volume. And so what it is it's the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. And the even more scary thing about this particular volume is there's about 300 pages in the back that are blank, which tells you what the federal government's anticipation is. They anticipate the Constitution continuing to be rewritten by the Supreme Court of the United States. So the object of the Convention of the States process is this: is to go away from the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court and go back to the Constitution as written by the founders. And the founders themselves gave us the mechanism for doing that in Article 5 of the Constitution. And George Mason is the one that's responsible for that. At the end of the Constitutional Convention, Mason stood up and said, "Look at guys," and I'm paraphrasing, obviously. It would have been much more eloquent. But he said, "Look at guys, the methodology that we have in place is not going to be workable when the problems that I anticipate arise. Because someday the government we're creating is going to abuse its authority. And when that day happens, we need to have somebody other than Congress being responsible for proposing amendments to rein in the power of Congress. Because considering human nature, Congress will never propose amendments to limit its own power." And after that speech, the final form of Article 5 was written, unanimously amending the proposal that was on the table prior to that in light of Mason's suggestion. And it was, we're going to give the states the ability to propose amendments, because otherwise Congress and the federal government can collude together and say, this is how much power we should have. And the founders believe one very important principle is that no level of government should be the final authority of how much power that level of government should possess, whether that's the Supreme Court or Congress or the president or the federal government collectively. And so the ultimate political power in our Constitution is to lawfully change the Constitution by yourself. Now, the Supreme Court is unlawfully changing the Constitution on a regular basis. So that's the most tyrannical form of political power that exists in our country. And the president, in a de facto sense, is changing the Constitution on a regular basis. For example, the Iran treaty framework that the House and the Senate very unwisely gave him flips the ratification process on its head. Rather than requiring 2/3 of the Senate to positively ratify the treaty with Iran, it requires 2/3 of both houses of Congress to vote no. Why 2/3? Because he's going to veto any ordinary legislation in that regard, and has done so. And so the idea that we flip the constitutional decision-making process on its head is in itself an unconstitutional act by the House and the Congress. Collectively, combined with the President, they all work together on one general premise. The power of Washington will be expanded. Anybody that thinks that we can, whoever we elect, pick the most, pick your favorite presidential candidate and then intensify, rather than how good they probably will be, let's make them as good as you actually believe they will be. And make that a reality. I don't care who it is that your favorite candidate is elected. They will not change the structure of Washington, D.C. from inside Washington, D.C. They may do some good things. In fact, there's a choice of whether we're going to slide into the abyss a little more quickly, or a lot more quickly, or less quickly than before. Those are your choices as the net result of any presidential election, because it will not change Washington, D.C. I have been here working since the Reagan administration, mainly for homeschoolers, trying to decrease the power of the federal government over our lives. It has never happened. Never happened. I'm working now with Tom Coburn on a regular basis on the Convention of the States model. Coburn, as a senator, produced reports of over $400 billion of fraud, waste, and abuse. Not one program he fingered, not one ever was repealed by Washington, D.C. There is no political will to do the right thing in Washington, D.C. Why? Because they use those programs of fraud, waste, and abuse to buy votes. It's all about their power. It's not about good government. Anybody that thinks that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, any of these programs are about helping the people, I've got some swampland to sell you quickly. It's about buying votes. It's always about buying votes. It's only about buying votes. Any benefit that anybody actually gets out of any such program is an accidental benefit that doesn't happen that often. But it is about buying votes, and Washington, D.C. will always buy votes. So what do we do in response? What we do in response is we use Article 5 of the Constitution. Article 5 of the Constitution says that whenever the two-thirds of the states call for a convention for the purposes of amending the Constitution, we have a convention, and there's a three-step process. Step one, in every step it's one state, one vote. 34 states have to agree on the agenda by passing resolutions that say, we want a convention for X. The application that I'm helping to promote throughout the country, our application says we want a convention for these purposes, to impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and impose term limits on federal officials. Now, walking through those briefly, fiscal restraints means more than a balanced budget amendment. A balanced budget amendment, standing alone, could actually be not such a good thing. Because, first of all, they could balance the budget by saying, if it's windy outside, then then we don't have to balance it. They have an exception clause that eats the rule. Secondly, without tax limitations and spending limitations, a balanced budget can be balanced by tax increases. And you keep on spending whatever you want. And so we haven't set a balanced budget amendment. We said fiscal limitations, which is broader, which means both, or all of the above, rather. Tax limitations, spending limitations, and a balanced budget amendment. As a team, that's a great idea. Standing by itself might be a great idea, might not be a great idea. Reducing the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. The Commerce Clause was intended to give the federal government the exclusive authority to regulate shipments across interstate lines. That's it. Not babysitters, not the environment, not manufacturing, not banking, not agriculture, not anything else other than, some of you, a couple of you in here are old enough to remember Dionne Warwick. I'm a Dionne Warwick age person. She sang the song Trains and Boats and Planes. That's interstate commerce, trains and boats and planes. Now, trucks and the internet and a couple other things, but it's interstate shipment of people, passengers, and goods across state lines. That is interstate commerce, nothing more, nothing less. Fixing that, getting the Commerce Clause back to its original meaning is what we mean by limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. The General Welfare Clause. Hamilton and Madison had slightly different views, but their views in today's terms are inconsequential. The difference between them are inconsequential because Madison said it's not a grant of power at all. Hamilton said, yes, it is a grant of power, but it only is effective where the states don't have any jurisdictional competence on the subject matter, which being translated means. The only things I can think of in all of American history where the two of them actually disagreed was the Louisiana Purchase and the space program. Other than that, everything else that is being justified under the General Welfare Clause, both men would agree is unconstitutional. All the entitlement programs, all, Obamacare, all of it is unconstitutional under the original meaning of the General Welfare Clause. Either way you look at it. And, I'll take either version. It doesn't matter to me. Give me Hamilton, give me Madison. Either version's okay. I'm happy to leave the Louisiana Purchase in place, and I'm happy to leave the space program in place, and the rest of it, no. So that's what we mean by limited power and jurisdiction of the federal government. It also means we've got to have something to do with the courts, because the Supreme Court of the United States has said about 20 times that the only realistic check on our power is our own internal sense of self-restraint. Well, that violates a lot of principles, the leading of which is no branch of government should be the final arbiter of how much power it has. The idea that the court can have its jurisdiction restricted by Congress, the court said the only realistic check on our power is our own internal sense of self-restraint. So the theoretical possibility of limiting the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court is not a realistic check. Moreover, it won't really help. Like, for example, if we today put a limitation on the Supreme Court hearing any abortion cases, that would freeze Roe versus Wade into place forever, because you can't hear the case that reverses Roe versus Wade. And all the lower courts, the Alabama Supreme Court, it's probably the best state Supreme Court in the country. Two of my friends are on the Alabama Supreme Court, Roy Moore and Tom Parker, both great guys. Yesterday, the Alabama Supreme Court said they didn't have any choice but to follow the Supreme Court's decision on same-sex marriage. Now, they blew a lot of rhetoric, a really great rhetoric, at the Supreme Court saying how horrible and unlawful the decision was of the Supreme Court. But if that court can't find a way to say we're not going to obey the Supreme Court of the United States on same-sex marriage, no court can find it. That is the best court in the country in terms of wanting to do something to rail against the Supreme Court of the United States. And so the idea that a lower court, if we remove the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court on marriage, it just freezes this thing in place forever. So if we did it if we removed their jurisdiction before they issued the same-sex marriage case, that'd be a world of difference, and that'd be great to do. But we haven't done it. So getting checks and balances on the Supreme Court is essential if we're going to be able to do something about it. So those are the things that we mean by restrict the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. The term limits can be either term limits on members of Congress or term limits on the federal courts. And I have to tell you, having talked to about 1,500 state legislators face-to-face about this, term limits on Congress are less popular with state legislators and some people in the public than term limits on the courts. Term limits on the court, people go, that's a good idea. And so keeping in mind, we're writing a germaneness rule right now. What's lawful to talk about? So the process goes like this. And there's three mathematical numbers. The official analogy is the junior-high locker combination. If your mind goes someplace else, it's your problem. It's 34, 26, 38. And so it's 34 are the number of states required to call for a convention of the states. And that is the historically correct name. People that call it a constitutional convention or a con are lying to you. They're lying about history, which, it's okay if you lie about me, but don't lie about James Madison and the founding of this country. The first Article 5 application in the history of our country was passed in November of 1788 by Virginia, calling for essentially the Bill of Rights. And they call it in their application a convention of states, as did the second application, also called it a convention of states. That is the historically correct name. It is a convention where you vote by state. That's what the term means. And so 34 states call a convention of the states. There have been over 400 applications for a convention of states in the history of our country. We've never had one because there's never been 2/3 of the states that agree on the subject matter. And so getting to 34 to agree on the subject matter is step one. Step two is at the convention where you vote by state. And yes, California will send a bunch of crazies, and Vermont will send a bunch of crazies, and New York will send a bunch of crazies, and so on. one state, one vote. New York gets one vote, Idaho gets one vote. California gets one vote, Wyoming gets one vote. Massachusetts gets one vote, Arizona, New Mexico, everybody gets one vote. 31 states today have Republicans controlling both houses of their state legislature. 8 states have Republicans controlling one house, Democrats controlling the other. The Democrats control 11 states. So I'll just spot you the 11 states off the top. 11 states will go there with crazy people who want to do crazy things. Guess what? In a room where you have to have 26 states to make a decision, 11 states lose. And so, you know, the Bible says, let the heathen nations rage in vain. And that would be a good way to analyze the 11 states. They will froth at the mouth, and there will be a motion to shut off debate, and that will be that. And the Republican-controlled states will be the winners. Now, people will say, yeah, but the Republican legislatures that appoint these delegates, they're sometimes rhinos too. True. But the question is, how much power should Washington, D.C. have? And there are only 2 options. Who are we going to have decide this question? Delegates appointed by Republican state legislators or Washington, D.C.? Those are your choices. There are no other choices. There's no third choice on the table. Those are your choices. And on the question of how much power some other guy should have, the people appointed by the state legislators are reliably far more conservative than the people in Washington, D.C. So, I mean, and the founders set it up that way. They wanted Group A deciding how much power Group B should have. They created institutional jealousy on purpose. And we can trust them to be less generous with Washington than Washington will be. So can we trust them for everything? No. You watch them like hawks when they're back home legislating for your state. But on the question of how much power Washington, D.C. should have, they are infinitely more trustworthy than Washington, D.C. on that same subject. Then you have to go to 38 states. So it's 34 to propose, 26, a simple majority at the convention, writes the actual text of the balanced budget amendment, of the tax limitation amendment. The way I would do a tax limitation amendment is simply sunset all existing taxes. Boom, like 3 years from the date of enactment, all taxes are gone. And you require a 2/3 majority vote of both houses of Congress to enact any new tax. Now, that's a tax limitation. You try to write GDP rules, they'll abuse all that stuff. But you put a procedural hurdle that's very difficult, that's the kind of way you can get real tax limitation. As just an example, I can't guarantee you that'll be the outcome, but that's an example of what's possible. The 38 states have to then ratify. Congress gets to choose whether it's going to be ratification conventions, which the state legislature picks the rules for how you pick the delegates for a ratification convention, but it will be something like this. Where we'll have special elections for the convention. There will be one delegate for every state house district. It'll be something like that. That's what was used when the 21st Amendment was adopted, which we repealed prohibition. Every state created a process very much like I've just described as the method for picking the delegates to the ratification convention. But Congress isn't going to do that. Why? Because the question is, how much power should Washington, D.C. have? And they got 2 choices here. We've got state legislators, or we've got citizens being elected to these special elections. Congress is going to say, state legislators are more likely to treat me okay than the citizens. The citizens will hang us up. So we're going to choose state legislators. Now, these are the same state legislators that just voted to have a convention to reduce the power of the federal government. So we've got, good legislators or really good citizens. I really don't care which the outcome is on that one because we win either side of that. And so so Congress does get to choose that, but then we go to 38 states. Either, in all likelihood, we'll just talk about state legislatures because that's virtually certain to be the choice that would be made. So if a single house in a state votes no, that state voted no because you have both houses to ratify something. So if 13 states vote no, meaning if a single house in 13 states vote no, it's no. So the idea that something crazy, either crazy to the right or crazy to the left can pass that system is, well, it's like saying that Barack Obama is going to appoint me to the next vacancy, to fill Justice Scalia's seat on the Supreme Court. I mean, it's theoretically possible. Wait, I'm getting tweeted. I think he just appointed me. That's possible, but it ain't going to happen. Anybody that does anything in politics, it's like Jim Gilmore running for president of the United States. Okay, well, he was on the ballot, and, it's not going to happen. And the same thing is true here. It is a political impossibility. Repeal the Second Amendment. Let's chase that red herring for a second. 38 states are going to ratify that? Really? Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, Virginia, South Dakota, North Dakota. I can get to 25 without breathing on the states that would vote no on that. And so the idea that something crazy could happen on that score is just simply stupid. Sorry to sound like Donald Trump. The other argument that you'll hear a lot is that the Constitution was adopted as a result of a runaway convention, and if they couldn't control it in those days, how can we control it today? The answer is the predicate is a lie. The Constitution was not adopted as a result of a runaway convention. That argument presupposes that the Articles of Confederation Congress had implied power, which is a non-starter once you just say the sentence out loud, and they called a convention that's not mentioned in the Articles of Confederation. And you have to violate the space-time continuum because 6 states, prior to Congress endorsing the convention, had already called the convention, named the time, named the place, named their delegates, and given them instructions. How can 6 states do that before the convention's called? Well, the answer is it was endorsed, not called by Congress. Congress is the one that said solely amend the articles, and the correct response was, thank you, Congress, for your opinion. But the states told their delegates to render the federal Constitution adequate for the exigencies of the Union. And so the idea that the delegates abused their authority, John Marshall, as a delegate to the Virginia Convention, stood up and said, the gentlemen have decisively demonstrated that the delegates did not disobey their instructions. And so I didn't quote that, that's paraphrased, but that's essentially what he said. So the idea that it was a runaway is bogus. The idea that this can be a runaway is bogus. I filed and won, with some help, the first lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of changing the rules in the middle of the stream for the Equal Rights Amendment. When the ERA was originally proposed, it had 7 years for ratification, and then the Congress purported to use its Article I power to change, under the Necessary and Proper Clause, to change the deadline. The federal court in Idaho ruled, using a 1798 decision of the Supreme Court of the United States, Congress has no Article I power in Article V matters. So people say, oh, the Necessary and Proper Clause, Congress will control it. They don't know how to read court decisions. They may not know how to read, at least not history. And so the idea that Congress can do that is not borne out by the actual historical record or the litigation record. And so you can't change the rules in the middle of the stream. Ladies and gentlemen, the Convention of States has passed 6 states so far: Georgia, Florida, Alaska, Alabama, Tennessee, and last week, Indiana. It has passed, at one time or another, 10 states in addition in one house. Virginia passed it in the House of Representatives. It just yesterday got carried over to the next term. So next year, we can start with the House already approving, and we go to the Senate. The Utah Senate has approved it. No, excuse me, the Utah House has approved it, and it's going to the Utah Senate this next week. The West Virginia Senate has approved it, and there are about 5 more states like that are currently in play that this year we have a real chance of getting. My best guess is that we're going to be in the teens someplace by the end of this legislative year. And if a bad election happens, if Hillary's president of the United States, we'll get to 34 by next June. And so come help us. Conventionofstates.com is our website, and I'll take your question.
Isn't that going to be necessary to get some state legislatures out, the legislators out, in order to get all the numbers that you need?
Well, Either they have to feel the light or see the light or feel the heat, one or the other. Because, you know, let's assume for the sake of discussion that all 31 Republican states vote yes. I got to get 3 more. I got to get 3 of the states where the Republicans control one house and the Democrats control the other. Washington State, for example, they control the Senate. Republicans control the Senate, but the Democrats have a one vote majority in the House of Representatives. And so I either have to scare one Democrat to thinking that he might lose his election or help him lose his election, one or the other. And so I got to get 3 states like that. But I do not have to get a single Democrat state to convert, to either call the convention or ratify amendments, because there are 39 states where the Republicans control either both houses or at least one house. And if you can control one house, the politics of the state say it's possible to control both houses. Right. It should not be a partisan issue, because this is about who makes the decision. You know, Massachusetts should be happy if there's a conservative president. They probably won't like some of the edicts coming from Washington, D.C. So letting Massachusetts be Massachusetts is the result of what we're doing. Letting California be California. And if they want to be crazy socialists, you know, more power to them. Let them go do their thing. Just don't send the federal taxpayers the bill. You know, go do your thing, and if you want to crash your state, let them. But this is true federalism. Federalism without a safety net, federalism without training wheels. It's true federalism. And so Democrats should be for this, but as of yet, we haven't had too many converts. Yes, sir.
Through this process, we could greatly increase, take back power from the federal government and invest it in the states.
Right.
To what extent do you feel the states want it, that they're willing to take it on? Do some rather avoid the responsibility of all that power?
I think that to some degree the legislators do want at least some of it, but I'm not relying on that. The question is, are there enough grassroots citizens that are going to beat the living daylights out of them to tell them, you're going to take the power back whether you want it or not? And if you don't want to use it, guess what? Leave it alone and let the people make their own decisions in their life. You know, we don't have to have a government law about everything. And so the reason we want to do this is because it's easier to change legislators and laws at the state level. And when you can do that at the state level, the people have more freedom. The ultimate goal is freedom, and the ultimate, and limited government is a path to freedom. Limited taxation is a path to freedom. And there are 2 basic schools of thought out there. The purpose of government is to provide for my needs. That's socialism. The purpose of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. This is the way to give ascendancy to the philosophy. The purpose of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. That's what we've got to do, and it's the only way freedom ever has a chance. I'll take 2 more questions, and I have to stop.
I've worked as a lobbyist for convention of states in the Soviet Socialist Republic of Vermont.
Good for you.
I wanted to know, now obviously we'll take any states we can get, but is it better if we only go after the conservative states and go get the crazy delegates from that state?
Well, the crazy delegates are going to come anyway, whether they vote for the convention or not. All 50 states will get to come. And we might not tell them exactly where the meeting is, but if they can figure it out, they get to come. And so, yes, keep working, because they should be in favor of this. They really should. And so, because, it's let Vermont be Vermont. Yes, sir, in the back.
I'm a big fan of Mark Levin, and if people want to know, he's written his book, The Liberty Amendment.
Right.
He's written out 11 amendments. It's brilliant.
Right.
Even if you read one and rejecting it, it's absolutely brilliant. You have to read it. But my question to you is, we're in this little room here.
Right.
There's a huge ballroom down over there with thousands and thousands of people in it. I have tried to get people to understand this Article 5 process. People reject it. They don't even want to hear it. For a lot of the arguments you had said,
Right.
well, it's going to be a runaway and stuff. We got to get this out in front of lots of people. I guess my question is there any effort to get this little room into that big room? Because people really don't know about this stuff. They absolutely do not.
Here's how to do it. If every single one of you would write to the board of directors of the group that runs this convention it'll happen next year. Yeah, I mean, it won't take 500 people. This number, writing to those people pointedly, would do it.
I mean, I respect a lot of the panels and stuff that you
Sure.
have in there, but this, what we're talking about here, is probably, other than maybe listening to maybe Ted Cruz or a couple other guys, is the most important thing going on in the 3 days that we're here at CPAC. This is it. This is saving the nation.
Yeah.
It's a game changer.
All right.
Nobody knows about it except us.
Conventionofstates.com. And if you want to, follow and have some fun, come to my personal Facebook page, which is Michael Faris, and I do wild and crazy stuff there, so Mike, there's probably more than one Michael Faris, but you just see my picture up there. You got the right one. All right, the timekeeper has left the room, so I'm good to go. So, Bob.
What I was going to say going to this question, and this is something all y'all can do, is that if you have, South, all y'all, but if you have on social media, Facebook, that kind of stuff, I mean, you can become the best educator. Actually, probably they'll know you more than they'll know Michael Faris. Well, he's probably the best person in the country to speak on this. They'll know you. So all of the things that he just said is available on the website or available in some article somewhere. He's got it all. So you could take that, you post it on your Facebook, you challenge your friends, and that was, we ran it in Arkansas last time. That was the biggest, we got it through the House because people knew me, but it was hard. We didn't get through the Senate because people just didn't know. And what they were hearing was, within even the conservative movement, all those crazy, ideas are being screamed loud. And so they're saying, look, if the right side of the Republican Party is divided on this issue, why should I stick my neck out? Status quo is okay. If the right side can't get lined out. And the reality is, it's such I don't know what percentage, but it's such a very small percentage of the conservative movement that is standing against this. But you have to start educating people and letting them know that the likelihood of any of these crazy things happening is so small. And I love the line that the likelihood of a Congress and a DC continuing to run over our rights and continue to run away with our rights, that's inevitable. That's going to happen unless we make the change. So.
Yeah. By the way, Bob Ballinger is a member of the Arkansas House and was our prime sponsor at Convention of States in Arkansas. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
I work in the Iowa State legislature for a legislator, and I know there are some just conservative Republicans who have kind of been rejecting this idea because they don't want to change the Constitution. What would be your answer to them? Because, I mean, they're conservative constitutionalists, and they just don't like the idea of changing it at all.
Well, the reality is the Constitution has been changed. And we are in a very precarious position right now on the Second Amendment. There were 5 votes for the Second Amendment being classified as an individual right. There were 4 votes for classifying it as a group militia-based right, which means we don't have the individual right to keep and bear arms. The majority opinion writer just went to heaven. And so we're now 4-4. And so if you want to take the risk of letting, I don't want to change, the Supreme Court says Second Amendment's not an individual right. Oh, I don't want to change the Constitution. I'm just going to stand on that. While all the people who own individual guns go to jail, they're sitting there thinking, I don't want to change the Constitution. Well, if they're that blind to the reality. I was going there, I upgraded. I upgraded. I couldn't pull the trigger. And they ought not to be in the legislature. But good news is, we passed the Iowa House. We're just waiting for the Iowa Senate, and the Democrat Senate Majority Leader won't let this be heard, so he's going to have to go. He's going to have to go. That's the reality. And so what we ever have to do to flip the Iowa Senate is what we're going to have to do to pass Iowa. Yes, Mary.
Looking at restricting the power of the federal government, one of the things you're looking at repeal the 17th Amendment so that the states once again have more direct control of their Senate.
That is germane under our application. We wrote our application to match 10 and a half of Mark Levin's Liberty Amendments. The one on property rights has a federal component and a state component. We wrote it to only include the federal component of that, not the state component. And so so it's germane. Now, do I think that's going to happen? That's a heavy lift because people have a hard time understanding why somebody else should pick their senator for them. But let me tell you this. If we do what we want to do on terms of the Commerce Clause and the General Welfare Clause and take away the ability of all state mandates from Congress to the states come through a misinterpretation of the General Welfare Clause. If we fix that, one of the big reasons we want to think about the 17th Amendment is remedied. And if we fix the Commerce Clause, virtually all federal regulation of states and state businesses is also fixed. And so if Congress was only deciding national defense, foreign policy, the operation of the Patent Office, and the other 21 things that are specifically enumerated in the Constitution, the need for the repealing the 17th Amendment would diminish. Just as a matter of good theory, I'd still favor it. But this is a matter of political reality. I'll live with direct election of senators quite happily if all they're deciding are the exact things that are in the text of the Constitution. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, I think we've exhausted the questions. If you want to help, please go to conventionofstates.com. If you live in Maryland, good luck. I testified in the Maryland legislature this week on Monday. It was an interesting exercise. Virginia, we've got a real shot, but we've got to flip 2 Republican senators. Dick Black, and there's a new guy. Amanda Chase needs some encouragement. Dick Black is on the wrong side of this. He's my senator.
He's my senator.
Yeah, so you need to talk to Dick. And there's the guy that took Ralph Smith's place. I don't remember what his name is. He's some young guy he was Ralph Smith's legislative aide, and he took his place, and he's an interesting person. Last question.
Arizona's actually a state that you could go right away.
Right.
There's one guy.
Andy Biggs. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, he's running for Congress now, and yeah, I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure he gets elected to Congress because I want him out. I want him out of the Arizona Senate. They're not going to do anything. Yeah, they're not going to do anything. It's major supermajority of Democrats on the committee, and it's not going to go anywhere. We could. Now, if Maryland, changes their political environment, that'd be great.
Well, we have one step up. We have a good governor.
That's right. Yes, sir.
Are you doing anything in Wisconsin?
Wisconsin, yeah, we are, but to tell you the truth, there's a guy named Chris Kapenga that's blocking us. That's a long story, but get Chris Kapenga to turn around and we move fast in Wisconsin. Thank you very much for being here, and I appreciate your encouragement. God bless you.
Mr. Faris.
Yeah.